Okay. It looks like we are a go. No glitches. And I'm just going to record this, obviously, for us to house it and keep it for later. So I'm going to start that now, and I'll go into the introductions and then invite you guys. Like we are a go. Oh, hold on. No glitches. I have my own Facebook and I'm just going to record this, obviously, for us to house it and keep it for later. So I'm going to start that now. And okay. Apologies. See, I told you. I warned you I wasn't tech savvy. My Facebook, I was hearing my own voice. So that's what was happening, people who are watching on Facebook. So I'm just going to do a little quick introduction for the topic for us, and then I'm going to invite you guys to introduce yourselves briefly and just share a little bit about who you are in your work and what brings you here. So welcome to everyone who's joining us live on Facebook and people who are tuning in later. This is the last in our season of Uncomfortable Conversations, and we're here to talk about gun violence. And the Boston Faith and Justice Network is hosting these conversations, and we're an organization that works to bring Christians together so we can consider how we can live generously to do justice in the world. And these conversations are very much a part of that mission and vision. They were born out of the pandemic when online was a necessity, but we have found that they've been a great tool to continue to help our community engage to make a difference. And that's our goal. And we've talked about a number of issues. We call them uncomfortable conversations because we tend to do topics where people don't necessarily want to dive in. They feel like if they do dive in and they don't know, there could be all sorts of other things going on. And we want to remove barriers to some of these uncomfortable topics so that we can call our community to be doers of justice. So that's what we're doing here. And I want to thank our panelists so much. We put this together kind of at the last minute over the last few weeks. We've been connecting and reaching out. So we're just so grateful that you're willing to give your time and share with us your expertise and your knowledge and your passion. So thank you very much. And I do just want to ask if anybody who's joining us has any questions that come up that you brought with you tonight or that come up as our panelists share, then feel free to put those in the chat and we will have a time at the end when we get to those. So I am just going to invite our panelists now to introduce themselves. So I'll start with you. Mark, will you just share a little bit about yourself?
Surely. I'm very thankful to the network, to you, Elizabeth, to Ivy, for the invitation to join tonight. Very excited to be talking with my two partners and friends and colleagues in all of this. I think of myself as wearing three hats. And so the main hat that I'm wearing, the one that's on top tonight, is I am the associate pastor of the Azusa Christian community, which is a very tiny Black Pentecostal church that is in the Four Corners section of Dorchester. I also have the privilege to serve as the president of the Massachusetts Coalition to Prevent Gun Violence. And so that's my second hat. You're gonna hear some of that coming from me, but I'll defer mostly to my colleagues to talk more about that. And then my day job is that I work for the Boston Public Health Commission, which I love. I am the director of the Division of Violence Prevention. And I'll stop there and we can come back for a little bit more about why this is important to me.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. Looking forward to hearing from you. And Ruth, you're next on my little association of cubes.
Great, thank you so much. And thank you for having us for this conversation. I'm super excited to be a part of this, to be really digging deep into this topic and to be doing so with great friends. So thank you. My name is Ruth Zachrin, and I am always very proud to be able to say that I am the executive director of the Massachusetts Coalition to Prevent Gun Violence. I've been in that role for a little over 3 years now, and I come to that work after over 2 decades of work with survivors of domestic and sexual violence. So, and doing trauma response basically with survivors of violence. And so I come to this work really from the lens of being a trauma clinician and advocate and thinking about the intersection of guns and interpersonal violence and trauma. I also think a lot about what trauma-informed policy making looks like. So that's another of the lenses that I bring to this conversation. I'm also excited to be having this discussion from the perspective of faith responses to gun violence I feel like my participation in the Jewish community has really informed a lot of the ways that I think about my work. And so I'm excited to touch on that this evening as well.
Thank you. And Ned?
Great. Thank you for having us. It's wonderful. Ruth and Mark and I work, almost daily on gun violence prevention issues, and it's wonderful to see them here and for us all to be able to share and answer some questions. I'm thinking about this being an uncomfortable conversation. I noticed that the title says, "Let's Talk Gun Control." And we've not been talking about gun control for a while now because that makes people uncomfortable, right? So we've been talking about gun violence prevention. I come to this work through my work as the Chancellor of the Episcopal Diocese of Massachusetts. The Episcopal Diocese of Massachusetts is based here in Boston in the cathedral on Tremont Street. And we extend out to 495 and to the Cape and the North Shore. West of 495 is the Diocese of Western Massachusetts. We work very closely with the Diocese of Western Massachusetts and with Bishop Fisher there. And so I've come to this from my faith and belief and contact with the Episcopal Church. In a more personal way, my brother was a victim of gun violence about 20 years ago, working as a physician in a medical clinic in San Francisco. One of the patients was mentally ill, didn't like what his doctor was doing, went home and came back with several weapons, killed the doctor, he killed his doctor, the receptionist, shot my brother 4 times. And he survived, he's doing well, he's still running, and is also involved in this work. He lives in Worcester, so we do it together, which is extra special. It wasn't until I got involved in the Episcopal Church, though, that I was able to connect with a wider group of folks that were really doing something about it. And then to find the coalition was even broader kind of group working on it. So that's where I come from in this work.
Thank you. Thank you all. I'm really looking forward to diving in. So let's do that. I'm going to start with you, Ruth. I'm going to do a couple of questions for you. And the first, most obvious question, since you're all connected to it, can you tell us a little bit about the work of the Mass Coalition to Prevent Gun Violence?
Yeah, I'm happy to. We think about our work in 4 main categories. The first being advocacy. So we do a great deal of work at the State House to advocate for legislation as well as budget line items that support violence prevention. So we have had a slate of bills that we've been supporting throughout this legislative session, which just ended a few hours ago. In addition to thinking about legislation that both addresses the flow of guns into our communities, as well as root causes of gun violence. We do a lot of budget advocacy as well, because we really believe that we're going to move the needle on gun violence through a combination of legislative change and sustained investment in community-based solutions. In addition to our advocacy work, we do a great deal of public education and awareness, public-facing events. We use a lot of storytelling, research, and webinars to educate folks about the nuances of gun violence and how it intersects with other issues. We've been doing some work with the folks who made the documentary This Ain't Normal, which is about youth violence, and having screenings of the documentary with panel discussions so we can really get into the nuances of root causes of youth violence. We do a lot of coalition building, as our name indicates. We have over 120 member organizations from across the Commonwealth and some of our national partners. We have a leadership team that's very reflective of those member organizations so that our members are really directing our work. And the last part of what we do is community organizing. We have a full-time organizer who is really wonderful and doing deep work in communities most impacted by gun violence with a focus on youth. So that work is also informing the rest of what we do, both in terms of legislative change, policy, and public awareness.
Okay, great, thank you. And you kind of mentioned the legislative session and what went on there. And obviously legislation around gun violence is really important, but I don't know that it's something all of us know kind of what's going on, what's the state of laws here in Massachusetts or even nationally. We hear bits and pieces, those of us who aren't intensively involved in the work and are maybe just coming to learn. So could you talk a little bit about the state of legislation in Massachusetts, and if you want to touch on this most recent session as well. But what is gun safety like here in Massachusetts?
Yeah, so just a couple of things to ground the conversation too, because when we think about legislative change, we recognize that gun violence is a public health issue that is driven by racial and economic disparity. So when we think about policy making, it's important that we are addressing legislation that both attends to the flow of guns in communities and access to guns, but also what are the policies that really get at those root causes and address those disparities. So our philosophy when we think about legislative work is to have a holistic approach. We've had some bills that attend to the flow of guns in our communities. We think a lot about the intersection of trauma and gun violence prevention. And we have also done some deep work around criminal legal reform, as particularly youth justice reform being foundational to violence prevention. So we had a number of bills that we were supporting in this session. And the session, as I mentioned, just ended well, actually not even so early this morning. It was supposed to end at midnight last night, but they had to go long given the amount of things that were still left to be done. And what happened with this legislative session is the focus at the end really ended up being about the Bruin case. And if folks are not familiar with that, that was a recent case that came out of the Supreme Court related to gun licensing regulations in the state of New York. And the decision made in that case had implications for how we think about gun licensing in Massachusetts. So the end of the session was really very focused on what do we need to do to our laws in Massachusetts, which are amongst the strongest in the country. And we talk a lot about how the Massachusetts model is one of the strongest in the country. And if it was replicated in other states and on a federal level, we know we would be saving lives because we have such a relatively low amount of gun violence in Massachusetts. One death, one injury, one traumatic event is too many, but compared to other states, we do have a lower rate. So if we could replicate that on a federal level, we know we'd be making a difference. But the Supreme Court case really called some of those regulations into question. And so the legislators came together and ended up creating a bill that was both going to be protective of those laws as well as strengthen them in some ways. And that was actually sent to the governor's desk today.
Okay. And is there an indication of whether or not it will get signed, or do we kind of have to wait and see?
We do. I don't think we have an indication that it won't be signed. And what will happen then is this will help continue to keep our laws strong. It also adds a provision that I do want to highlight because it's something near and dear to my heart. It actually increases protections for survivors of domestic violence. So it adds harassment protection orders in addition to restraining orders for protections from firearms, and that is very significant. Folks may have heard people talk about closing the boyfriend loophole on the federal level, and this was actually a step towards doing that here in Massachusetts. So once this hopefully gets signed, that will be in place, and then we're looking ahead to the next legislative session. We've heard from legislators that are committed to passing a comprehensive gun reform bill at the beginning of the next legislative session. So we will be working diligently to make sure that happens, and that some of the priorities that we've had during this past session, including better data analysis of the trace data that's collected from guns in the aftermath of a shooting, as well as more regulation of ghost guns, that's all included in the package that gets put together in the next legislative session.
Okay, great. Thank you. And while we're on the topic of laws, can you talk a little bit about red flag laws? Because that is something that I think it's another one of those words and phrases that are in the zeitgeist as you hear about gun reform and gun violence, but I don't know that we all fully understand what a red flag law is generally. And is there one in Massachusetts? Like, what does that look like here? Is there a federal one? Like, what's going on there?
Yeah, thank you. So in Massachusetts, we have something called the Extreme Risk Protection Order, and that was passed in 2018. So it's been in place for multiple years now. And a resource that I just want to put out there to folks, if they want to learn more about extreme risk protection orders, which we call ERPOs, we worked with our friends at Stop Handgun Violence to put together a website that gives a great deal of information about what ERPOs are and how to access their protections. It's maerpo.org, and I can put that information in the chat later. So if folks have more questions, they can reference that website. But the Extreme Risk Protection Order provides an opportunity for a family member or for law enforcement to approach the court to have someone's guns temporarily removed if they're thought to be a risk of harming themselves or others. And it is a temporary measure, it's not for forever, but it is meant to keep someone safe from harming themselves through firearm suicide or harming others if the concern is that they're in an emotional crisis and need to not have immediate access to firearms.
Okay, so that's a Massachusetts law.
That's a Massachusetts law.
There isn't any federal law that's similar.
So in the recent bipartisan bill that was passed a few weeks ago, there is a provision that provides both funding and some assistance for more states to pass such laws. But it is not a federal requirement that every state have them. But there are provisions in the recent bipartisan bill to support the development and implementation of such laws.
Okay. And is there any data? I mean, it's 4 years and I'm not sure how this would even be tracked, but about the effectiveness of this Massachusetts law specifically, or red flag laws generally?
So it's a great question. And there's sort of two pieces to the answer. In Massachusetts, we've not seen a great deal of utilization of the ERPO laws. And part of our concern is that there hasn't been widespread public awareness. And a law like ERPO is only as effective as people know about it. So there's actually some funding in the recent state budget to support more awareness and a public awareness campaign, because we do believe if more people knew about ERPO, we would see a higher rate of utilization. So that's one piece. But there is data from the states that have such laws in place in terms of how many people have utilized their protections. And if it saves one life, if we know that one family has been able to help a loved one by putting some distance between them and their firearms during a time of crisis, then it is a very important law to have in place.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to shift gears a little over to Mark and engage you a little bit with your position. So what do you think the role is of faith communities in preventing gun violence and serving people in communities that have been affected by gun violence? How do you see us being called as people of faith to this work?
Well, you know, for me, I live in the neighborhood where our church is located. Mm-hmm. And we had a homicide in our neighborhood this morning. And over the weekend, we had 3 people who were shot non-fatally, but 2 were 16 and 1 was 19. And last Wednesday, we lost one of our younger members of the community, 15 years old. He just turned 15. His birthday was the week prior, to a homicide. And so I think as a person of faith, as a person who believes in love and joy and peace, endurance, patience, gentleness, kindness, that those things ought to be evident in my life. They ought to be part of the fruit of my life. And so that compels me then to be involved in my neighborhood, to be engaged around these kinds of issues and concerns. And so that's the motivation. I think part of the challenge, and I'll say, you know, I talked about all of those incidents. I love this neighborhood. I mean, I have no desire to live any other place than where I chose to live in this neighborhood. I moved into this neighborhood when it was much, much more violent than it is right now. If you go back to the late 80s and the early 90s, when the whole country was experiencing the crack epidemic, and we saw tremendous levels of violence. Boston experienced 150 151 homicides at its peak. It's much less now. And people really can't tell you why, if you ask why. I mean, people will give answers, but we don't necessarily understand exactly, we did this and it caused that. But I believe that it was a lot of people, a lot of things made it happen, and a lot of people working together, trying to work in some sort of harmony and under some sort of agreement that people should not die, young people particularly should not die, helped to bring about that change. And so all of that to say, the motivation is that love, but then the challenge is, well, now what do I do? And so picking up on where Ruth was speaking, well, what can you do? What can my church do? What can the network, the Boston Faith and Justice Network do? Join the coalition. Go to the website, sign up, and join, because our legislature got some things done this morning, but they didn't get enough done. And that means that when they restart next year, we're going to go to the polls, go vote. I won't tell you who to vote for. I will tell you to vote, go vote. And we're going to have a new legislature seated at the beginning of next year. We need to show up to remind them that there's work to do. When we show up, when the people show up and we remind our legislatures that this is important to us and this needs to happen, the coalition worked on that piece, a fairly modest request of the legislature to, we have all this data and information on gun violence. Let's study it. Let's try to understand it. Doesn't cost any more money. We've already got the data. It's already there. It didn't happen. So next year, when they come back, make it happen. Because I talked about all that violence in my neighborhood here, and we have an insufficient understanding of why, what's underneath it, what's driving, why did that happen? And if we took some of the information and data we have, if we work together, we might understand a little bit better what's under and what's driving the violence, and then we'll be able to understand a little bit more how to address it and how to solve it. So love is a motivator. What's the action? Join the coalition. The church is also, as it was going through working to respond to the violence that I talked about, eventually created its own organization, the Ella J. Baker House. I can come back and tell you a little bit more who Ella was. The Ella J. Baker House created something called the Violence Reduction Task Force, which meets every week, Wednesday morning, 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. at 411 Washington Street in Dorchester. Come join us, right? We'll talk about all of that violence that I just ticked through that happened since the last time we met on a Wednesday morning. And we'll be struggling with what are we going to do about it. Come join us and be a part of that. As I talk later on, I may give other opportunities, things that people can do to follow through on that motivation of love and joy and peace.
Yeah, it's so helpful. I mean, I appreciate the way you talk about it, as it's great as people of faith that we have this motivation of love, and that's important, that's where it comes from. But the how is really nuanced and complicated. But I mean, again, right in front of me, I have people engaged in the work. And then you've named a bunch of practical steps that I think sometimes we struggle. People who want to engage, they want to make a difference, and they don't know the steps. So that's a big part of what we want to do here. So thank you for those very practical pieces and action steps that people can take. We'll put some of the links that you mentioned and Ruth that you mentioned as well in the chat here on the Facebook Live, and we'll migrate them over to YouTube when this lives there. So thank you for those. I want to talk a little bit more about the work you're doing and just what you've seen in your neighborhood. We talked a little bit about it before we went on, and I just found it really helpful the way you talked about some of the different things that go into creating a community that might be experiencing more violence. Like, it's not just about, because sometimes, again, we want to be like, guns, let's legislate guns off the street and then we're done. But you definitely brought up some other things that lead to communities looking and being the way they are. And would you share some of that with us?
Yes, let me get it 2 points. One is, what's happening in neighborhoods that are affected by gun violence. So, the city of Boston now is probably experiencing about 50 gun homicides a year, but they're not evenly spread throughout the city. They're concentrated in some neighborhoods. So some neighborhoods are more affected by gun violence, significantly more affected by gun violence than other neighborhoods. And so what that does is it creates, it's exposure to trauma, right? And so one of the things that happened, the reason why Ruth and I know each other and are friends is we were both in a park in Phil's Corner, Town Field, on a Mother's Day morning for the Louis D. Brown Peace Institute's Mother's Day Walk for Peace. Another thing you can do, go to the Mother's Day Walk for Peace. If you haven't already gone, go. It's a good thing to do on a Mother's Day. So I'm there in the park and someone walks over to me, a friend of mine, and says, I want you to meet Ruth. And Ruth, it's our first day on the job. The first executive director of the coalition. And I'm there, I'm dressed like this. It's Mother's Day, big day in the church, big day. But I'm going to make sure I'm in this park for this walk. And Ruth says, hi, I'm with the coalition, and we've gathered and convened for, at this point, nearly 7 years, or nearly 10 years now. And we've really been very focused on controlling the guns. What can we do to control the guns? And we're going to keep doing that. We're going to keep that focus, but we're also going to talk about what Ruth mentioned around racial justice, inequity, and what the root and what grassroots folks are doing in their neighborhoods to address gun violence. We're going to do, it's going to be a both and. We're going to do both. And I said, great, keep up the good work, right? And long story shorter, now I'm part of the coalition and I chair the board of it, right? So, but that's action one can take. So there's another action. Check out the Peace Institute, show up for the Mother's Day Walk for Peace. I'm going to put this in the chat. Now I'm sort of popping closer to the top of the work I do day to day. One of the programs in the Division for Violence Prevention at the Boston Public Health Commission is the Neighborhood Trauma Team Network. And I won't go on and on about it. You can check out the website and you can see the basics of what it does. But if you live in Boston, particularly if you're in one of the neighborhoods that are most impacted by community violence, you have a neighborhood trauma team. Check it out. Get to know the services. Tell your neighbor about it. Tell your neighbors that are impacted by violence that this is available to them, that you can be a part of this. You can be a part of your neighborhood trauma team. There's a phone number you can call if you're impacted by community gun violence and exposed to that kind of trauma. You're looking for some support, someone to talk to in the aftermath of experiencing and suffering that. And then let me go back to some of the conditions that I think contributed. This is one set of conditions that contributed to what the neighborhood was like, going back to that time around, late 80s, early 90s. So when I moved into the neighborhood, I lived on Harvard Street, and there was a bridge, and Harvard Street's a main thoroughfare through the neighborhood. There was a bridge that was closed, structurally unsound, can't go over it, it's closed. So, and it was that way for a long time. That meant that an emergency vehicle couldn't get to the neighborhood if it needed to without going a roundabout way. It meant that you couldn't move in and out of the neighborhood. Commerce couldn't move in and out of the neighborhood. So that impacts safety, that impacts the economy. Stayed closed for a long time. And there was a train, a commuter train, that rode through the neighborhood and didn't stop. So not only did the residents not get access to transportation, basic transportation. They didn't even have the ability to go over the bridge. So, and then this violence is escalating. And sometimes you need to pray. So let me give you two prayers. One is, Lord, who's doing something? Somebody must be doing something about this. And the day I said that prayer, that day at the at my door front was a flyer from the Common Square Neighborhood Council that basically said, "We're doing something. Come join us." And if you have any questions, call Reverend Bill Lesh. So I did, and that's how I got involved in a lot of the neighborhood work. And so a lot of that work is what got that bridge open. And a lot of that work is what now has that train that used to bypass our neighborhood stopping in our neighborhood. So now our residents have access to downtown and also going out towards Reedville. Now, then it comes another problem. You fix one problem, you create another one. Now that you can get from this neighborhood to downtown in 5, 6, 7 minutes comfortably, the property values are going up. So the people that lived here that made the change happen are now hearing from landlords, "Oh, I'm going to raise your rent $500, right?" And people don't really have a lot of recourse to prevent that from happening. And so we got to organize again, right? And so that people who live here now, as the neighborhood is getting better because of work that people who live here now did for many, many years, so that we can remain in the neighborhood that we helped to improve in the first place. So access to transportation, whether it's commuter rail or just driving down the road, but also protection, policy protection, to be able to be protected from being displaced from your own neighborhood.
Great, thank you. I think that does a really great job of highlighting the intersectionality of this issue. And I mean, Ruth, you got at that as well. And again, sometimes those of us who are entering into this work as learners and kind of trying to figure out where to plug in and what this all means, I think it's really helpful to get that kind of education right away. So again, we're not just thinking about, as you put it, Elder Mark, like taking the guns off the streets, which is an important piece, but isn't the only piece. I think that's the one that gets the most attention. So I appreciate the more nuanced conversation. Okay, so I want to move on to Ned. If I can ask you a couple of questions, and I would love it if you could share about the work of the Episcopal Church here in Massachusetts, and just generally in the area of gun violence. As I started to do my research, this was one of the first things I came across when my friend Google told me. I asked it about faith-based gun violence organizations and work. The Episcopal Church was all over the place. And I just found that really heartening that work was being done, but I would love if you could just share some specifics about what's going on.
Sure, I'd love to. It's one of the things that makes me proud to be an Episcopalian, is not only do we send thoughts and prayers, but we take action. After Sandy Hook down in Connecticut, Ian Douglas, the Bishop of Connecticut, got very involved in working with the families and with the victims. And out of that was sprung an organization called the Bishops United Against Gun Violence, which now has 100 Episcopal bishops across the country very actively involved in gun violence prevention. They've been convening national meetings, convening national conferences, and calling people to action, marches, and it's been really heartening on the national level. And they've had a big effect on the Episcopal Peace Fellowship, which is a program sponsored by the National Church in Washington, D.C., which stays very closely in tune with what's happening in the Capitol with respect to gun violence issues, and calling people to witness and to testify. So it's really been everywhere, and really pervades the Episcopal Church. 2 resolutions were passed on gun violence issues just last month at the General Convention of the Episcopal Church. And that's been carried out right through here on the ground in Massachusetts. In fact, the Episcopal Diocese here in Massachusetts and Western Mass, all through this state, have really been leaders in the Episcopal Church. There was a youth worker at St. Stephen's in the South End, where I attend church, who was shot in a drive-by shooting in 2013. And that really galvanized all of us here in Massachusetts. And our campaign is called Be Peace for George Fuentes, who was the one shot and killed. So it's been very much brought home to us. And again, back then, we set up this task force, and it was meant not just to deal with gun reform issues, which we've been very involved in, but also employment for teens, encouraging academic excellence, working with families. So some of the root causes that Ruth was talking about have been part of the Be Peace for George campaign from the very beginning. And we've been very active on the gun reform front. It is very effective when we go up to the legislature and we're having testimony and there's a hearing on gun violence prevention. We have a panel of, faith leaders. We have a panel of chiefs of police. We have a panel of victims, and we have a panel of youths who are affected every day by gun violence. On their way to school, they worry about gun violence. When they go out at night, they worry about gun violence. So the youths at St. Stephen's have been a big part of that testimony and a big part of everything going on at the legislature. But we're really proud that the cathedral on Tremont Street will welcome the Peace MVP Award, our big fundraiser, on October 10th. We have thrown open the doors of the cathedral. It's really the people's temple for the March for Our Lives and for many other events connected with the coalition. I can say that I'm very proud that the Episcopal Church in Massachusetts has been a tremendous force in the gun violence world, and it's very deep and dear to us.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. And like other things, we'll put links to the stuff that you mentioned so people can check that out more closely. But it's really encouraging to hear all of that. I want to ask you, I want to get at like two Ned specific things. One, I'm going to speak to the lawyer side, and the other one, I just want to speak a little bit again to the Episcopalian side, not that we're separating. But how does your faith specifically animate you? Because I know when we talked, what really came through for me was how much your faith kind of directs you to do this, as opposed to, I think sometimes people think, well, I'm a Christian or I'm, a Muslim and I do these things, as opposed to a faith that this is my faith causes me to do these things. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I didn't grow up Episcopalian, and there was a time when, 15 years ago or so, I would, close my eyes to pray, and I got angry, and when I joined the Episcopal Church, I began to be able to close my eyes and pray, and mostly what I found myself doing was giving thanks for all the blessings that I've received. Of course, praying for blessings for all those close to me and those I know, but also thinking a lot more about those less fortunate, and certainly top on that priority list is victims of gun violence. And when you pray and you think about the victims of gun violence, you're called to action. It's just a direct connection as far as I'm concerned. I had the opportunity last month to go down to Alabama to visit the Episcopal Church in Alabama and Vestavia, Alabama, where 3 of the parishioners were shot at a potluck dinner for seniors, to see the kind of resilience and the kind of faith that motivated and drove their response to that terrible crime. It's when I think of my favorite prayers, oftentimes I love the Beatitudes, and one of the things I love the one about the peacemakers. The blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called children of God. And, that keeps coming back to me. There's a simple prayer from St. Francis that always comes back to me. Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. And these are the things when I'm closing my eyes and thinking about what my faith is calling me to do. These are the things that motivate me to dedicate my time and effort and to work with others. And you see their faith and you see their determination to do good in this world. And it's a wonderful thing.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. And then I would just want to go a little lawyerly. I mean, you all have a level of expertise in this area that encompasses the legal and the practical and the social, but specifically what prompted us to feel like this maybe was a right time to bring this conversation to our community was the Supreme Court decision, the Bruin decision, because it seems like people were more willing to take a look at this. The Supreme Court just gets the headlines. So it's not as if, this issue wasn't ongoing and we were unaware, but it just felt like, oh, okay, this is something now people maybe are poking at more than they were last week. And obviously the Uvalde shooting not too long before that also kind of brought people to that conversation in a way that the mass shootings do. But specifically the Bruin decision, can you just explain that a little bit, what that decision was? And I know Ruth sort of mentioned what happened in this last session and sort of the good that was done. Maybe you could just bring that together for us so people who aren't as familiar with the legalities could maybe understand that.
Yeah, and I do think so. I think I neglected to say in my opening kind of introduction that I'm a lawyer. So the chancellor of the Episcopal Church is lawyer to the bishops, but on my day job, as Mark would say, I work at a law firm, Hemingway and Barnes in Boston, and have been representing families and doing estate planning, trust work, family disputes in court, and so forth. So I'm a lawyer, and so in reading the Bruin decision, what strikes me about this area is that it can really you can disappear down a rabbit hole. And there's so many, whether it's ERPO or whether it's other things that can get pretty complicated pretty fast. So let me try to keep it simple. New York State had a statute that required that if you applied for a gun license, you had to state why you wanted your gun. And the result was, if you said you wanted to go to a shooting range, they would have a restriction on your license that you could only take your gun from your house to the shooting range and back again. And that was challenged. And I won't get into all the maneuvering that went into it, but because it was said to be unconstitutional to require that people have a reason. It's a constitutional right. You don't need a reason to speak out in your First Amendment right. You shouldn't have to have a reason to exercise your Second Amendment right, was the theory. And that's what the court adopted. And the court said in its most kind of limited reading, you can't require an application for a gun licensee to give a reason why they want the gun. Now, here in Massachusetts, that is part of the statute, but to our knowledge, it's not a part of the statute that gets used a lot by local chiefs of police when they're actually making decisions about licenses. There is a provision in the statute here in Massachusetts that allows the chief of police to turn down a license if the person applying is not suitable. So there's a suitability standard which allows the chief of police to exercise discretion if there have been reports of domestic violence or this person has anger management problems that have manifested themselves in various ways. And we're hoping that suitability requirement will remain, and if it's challenged, will be upheld and allowed to remain. So that gives the chiefs of police a lot of discretion. And there are also a list of, in the Massachusetts statute, a bunch of list of prohibited persons who can't get guns. So the hope is that this decision will not have a dramatic impact on Massachusetts. My concern is that it's being taken nationwide as a kind of a license to just open the doors, throw the doors open, that guns will be no longer restricted anywhere. In New Hampshire, where I am right now, the governor signed a bill into law last week in response to the Bruin case. And the law says you cannot stop a person from bringing a gun into a school. It's no longer can be restricted. So if there's a 19-year-old walking with an AR-15 through an elementary school, you can't call the police. If you do, they're not going to do anything. And until that person starts shooting, nothing will be done. So I think in states where they are really looking to be radical about gun rights, the Bruin case has been taken as kind of authority and a license to do truly outrageous things. And that, I think, may be the biggest impact.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that explanation and that sobering news from New Hampshire. So I'm going to shift gears and just ask some general questions that I feel like any of you guys could answer if you're interested. But before I do that, Ruth, I had forgotten in our Q&A session, you had talked about how your faith community and your faith kind of also animates your work, and specifically Rabbis Against Gun Violence. Is that right? Okay. I mean, just that you had mentioned that as an organization, I want to make sure we share. So I'm throwing that out to our friend putting stuff in the chat. But could you just talk a little bit about that and what that looks like for you?
Yeah, so I am a member of the Jewish community, and I feel like the work that I do very much informs who I am as a Jew, but I also show up for this work as a Jew. So I show up Jewishly for the work of violence prevention and peacemaking. And so for me, it's really part and parcel. There's a lot of teachings in Jewish faith that have really inspired me. And I'll just touch on two very briefly. One is from a series of writings called Pirkei Avot. And there are many translations of this, but the basic idea of the quote is, we are not commanded to finish the task, nor are we permitted to turn away from it. And that's something that resonates with me very deeply. I've always been in work. I always joke that I'm in the work of putting myself out of business, whether it's been domestic or sexual violence work or now gun violence prevention. I've not been successful yet at putting myself out of business. But when the task feels overwhelming, I find myself coming back to that quote of, yes, it's overwhelming. I'm not commanded to fix the whole thing, but I'm also not free to turn away from it. And so that's something that I feel very deeply. And another teaching that has really meant a lot to me, it's a slightly more obscure. It's from a prayer that we call Hallel. And the Hebrew is Et Halei Lifnei Hashem B'Artzot HaChaim, and it's translated as, I shall walk before God in the land of the living. And to me, that's a very active statement. So it's not passively that I get to be in front of God in the land of living. I have some responsibility. And I think a lot about what does it mean to live, to fully live. And so I find that those are things that very much ground me and I take with me into this work. And thank you for mentioning Rabbis Against Gun Violence. There are many Jewish groups and Jewish organizations involved in the work of creating safety and peace and justice in the world. That is one that is more specific to gun violence prevention.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, so one question I have is, and you've all kind of touched on this a little bit, but I want to call attention to it and maybe call it out. What are some specific organizations that people should get connected with? Obviously, the coalition, we'll share that again, because you guys obviously are doing such good and important work. But organizations people can connect with and specific actions people can be taking in order to engage in this work.
Well, I just wanted to say your own church, your own synagogue, your own mosque, and doing it together. Ned used the word everywhere, right? So our co-religious are everywhere. And so I really value the work that the bishops of the Episcopal Church diocese do across the country. And I value the opportunity to learn from and be in fellowship with the Jewish community. One of the words the Jewish community taught me was, and I'll help, Ruth can help me with this, tikkun olam, repair, the world, right? And so there's the the Black Jewish Alliance, a Christian Jewish Alliance. I identified, I mentioned earlier, Black Pentecostal, but very much value opportunity to work with Episcopal churches and Episcopal dioceses. And so we can do great work here in Massachusetts, but if our neighbors to the north are not, then it will undermine the work here, and it will also be harmful, I believe, to residents in Massachusetts. So I think we have a vast majority of us agreeing that people should not die from gun violence, not in mass shootings, not in accidental shootings, not in neighborhood shootings, not in domestic violence shootings, and not in suicide shootings. So we have this agreement. How can we turn that agreement into action, both here in Massachusetts and in New Hampshire and across the country? And I think faith communities being interconnected with one another and in dialogue with one another, so organizations like Rabbis Against Gun Violence and Bishops Against Gun Violence are very important because it gives us an opportunity to support our brothers and sisters in neighboring states in their efforts and to try to push to enhance. So I think in some ways, charity begins at home, right? And so your own local assembly, and then how that assembly is connected and interconnected to people across this Commonwealth, but also people across the nation, is certainly an important place to start. We are the Massachusetts Coalition to Prevent Gun Violence, but we have similar efforts in other states, different names, and they're national efforts, right? That people can check out and be part of. And so they're national efforts you can plug into as well.
Elizabeth, when I first got involved back in 2012 and then working up to that wonderful legislation that we got passed in 2014, we would show up at hearings and be outnumbered, 5-1 by the local NRA affiliate. Smith & Wesson used to bus in employees and give them a day off with pay to show up at these hearings and at the State House. We have, through the effort of people like the people on this call, changed that around tremendously. The last time we went up for a hearing at the State House, the people from GOAL, Gun Owners Action League, which is the local NRA affiliate, apologized for their poor showing in light of the number of people we had. We need to, march with our feet. I sometimes hear of calling, pray with our legs. We need to march. We need to be there, and each one of us can be there. There are action items that come from the coalition. It's been wonderful. Call your legislator, come to the hearing, come to the State House. Each of us can make a big difference that way. And doing it through your church means you're going to find like-minded people who are going to come with you. And there is strength in numbers.
That's great. Thank you.
And I would just love to build on that, both what Mark and Ned said, because Mark talked about doing it with your own faith community. We have a number of churches and synagogues and religious organizations that are members of the coalition that get our action alerts. But do just what Ned said, which is to take action together so you're not in isolation. We are living in a very overwhelming world. I keep on talking about how we're drinking from a fire hose of catastrophic news. And sometimes it can be paralyzing. And one of the ways we care for ourselves, we talk a lot about self-care for activists, but activism is also a form of self-care. It helps us feel like we can be active in doing something as opposed to just feeling overwhelmed. Even better to do so in community with others. I'm obviously a big believer in building coalition. That's what we're really about. The coalition comes in many different ways. And I think it's really powerful, whether it's the Mother's Day walk or showing up for one of our member works for another event they're having in the community or to support their efforts, or responding to one of our action alerts and pounding the pavement of the State House to, shake the tree and bang your pots in front of the legislators' offices. Doing so in community and with others who care about these issues is really powerful. And it's a part of what sustains you. So I really appreciate that lens on you don't have to do this by yourself. And some of these things can feel a little scary too, especially if you don't have a history of doing this kind of advocacy work or are newer to the issue. You don't have to be the expert at anything. None of us are really the expert at anything. Just sort of bring that love, that peace, that unity, that the sense of passion for the cause and desire to be a change maker. And that is really powerful.
That's great. Thank you all. I think that's some really helpful perspective and also action steps. And it is really encouraging to know that people can make a difference. This issue can be incredibly overwhelming if you're just sort of observing it, and you have the ability to sort of turn away if you choose to, because it might not affect your community. But if you want to engage, it still can feel like, how do I do this? And so I really appreciate that perspective that we can, in community especially, make a difference, and also the admonition to engage with our churches. Because not only does that give us that community of activism, but it hopefully can also enlarge the influence of the work. So thank you very much. We are nearing the end of our time. So I just wanted to quickly ask, we've talked a lot about Massachusetts, we've touched on some national things, but are there national organizations or specific upcoming issues that we can highlight for the community?
I'm going to let Ruth answer that question. I want to go cosmic for a moment.
Love it.
I said I would mention 2 prayers. I mentioned only one. And so, Ruth used the word fear and also the feeling paralyzed. And so I was driving home one day, this is many years ago in the neighborhood that I live in, and there was all this gun violence, and I felt afraid. I mean, you could feel the fear in your body. You can feel it. You can feel your in your throat, your muscles tightening. I could feel the fear. And Ned talked about closing your eyes to pray. So I didn't close my eyes because I was driving, but I prayed about the fear, and I received peace. Right, you know, the peace of God took and stood over my heart and over my mind. And, you know, the Bible says that perfect love casts out all fear. And so I'm not trying to say I have no fear at all now, but the perfecting of the love of God has done a lot to cast out the fear, which allows me to act and not be paralyzed. So that's the other ammunition, if you will, to pray. So that's the cosmic level, but at the national level, I'll turn it over to Ruth.
So a few things to say about work on the national level. And one is that there's great power in partnerships between national and more local organizations. And we have very strong relationships with our national partners. They have shown up for us in a multitude of ways. Earlier this year, we were very involved in advocating for an allocation of American Rescue Plan funds for violence prevention. We were successful in doing so. And I think one of the reasons we were successful is we had support from national partners who helped put what we were doing in Massachusetts in a broader context of what's happening around the country. And that is powerful. What we do in Massachusetts matters greatly. What we are doing in Massachusetts, we know that we have a model that is strong compared to other states, but we don't live in a bubble. And so what's happening on the national level very much impacts our safety here in the Commonwealth. As was mentioned before, weak gun laws in states like New Hampshire have an impact on the safety of the residents of Massachusetts. So we do not exist in a bubble. So things that are happening on a national level, just this past Friday, there was a vote in the House to ban assault weapons. Now it has to go to the Senate. We don't have a lot of optimism that it will make it past the Senate, but that is a national effort that makes a difference, because when we had an assault weapon ban, we had fewer deaths from gun violence. It's just statistically speaking true. And that ban lapsed almost 20 years ago, and the rate of gun violence has gone up ever since. So one thing that folks here in Massachusetts can do, because what I hear from people is we have a strong legislative delegation in Massachusetts, that's true, but we have to remind them to keep this at top of mind. And then we have to call all of our friends and family in other states where their legislators may not be as on board. And we have to agitate them to get involved and to contact their legislators and to be change makers and agitators and pot bangers, so that we have senators and representatives from other states who start to get more on board with these issues, and to ground it in the core value of we are working to save lives. We are working to make sure that no child is a victim of gun violence at school, walking home from school, or playing outside after school. And that right should always be held higher than the right to unfettered access to guns. So I think we just have to keep on agitating with our friends and family members in other states to make that national change come to fruition.
That's great. Thank you. I really love the image that you keep bringing of the pot bangers. That's just beautiful to think about, making noise for a good cause, some good trouble. Okay, I'm gonna close this up. I will invite you guys if you have any final thoughts, but I just want to say to our community that's watching now and later, thank you for taking the time. And I encourage you to check out the resources which are in the chat, and we will continue to share those through our social media and emails and newsletters. We don't want to have this conversation and then move on. We want to keep engaging with this issue. And apropos of that, our last series of uncomfortable conversations was on mass incarceration. And we had some wonderful panelists that spoke to that. And this fall, we'll be doing a book club with the book Rethinking Incarceration. And so if you're interested in that, just keep an eye on our social media and your inbox if you're signed up for our newsletter. If you're not, do so. And that's one of the ways we're staying engaged with issues that we've talked about. And we also will continue our Uncomfortable Conversations series in the fall. We're going to be talking about disability and the faith community, housing justice, and voting rights. So there's more uncomfortable conversations ahead, and just encourage everyone to stay with us and keep engaging. And so now I just want to invite you guys, if you have any final words, anything you want to leave us with before we sign off for the night.
Well, I'll just give a shout out to young people. One of those national organizations is March for Our Lives. And there's also a local chapter of March for Our Lives. And I was very, very impressed with our youth in organizing a rally that took place in Christopher Columbus Park. Excellent job. And young people did that all over the country. We did it here on the day we were supposed to, and it happened all over the country. And we saw some movement, some positive, that law that President Biden recently signed happening right in the aftermath of that. So I'd like to give the young people credit for pushing it over the line. And so shout out to the youth.
Okay, thank you. That's wonderful and very encouraging.
I would just like to say that faith gives us strength to act and to believe, but it also has a tremendous impact when we speak with faith, through faith, because of our faith, in a public forum. When we go to the legislature and we speak through faith leaders, it has a whole different impact. It's one of many groups that has impact, but it really is remarkable to see faith in action.
Great, thank you.
And I just want to shout out the folks on the screen, because this is how we make change, is by having these conversations and coming together in community and in coalition. You know, folks from very different faith backgrounds, to have this conversation is really powerful. And so I just want to appreciate everyone on the screen, including the two people with me who I get to work with very closely as a part of the coalition. And I was thrilled to hear that they would be my co-panelists for this event. And just the last thing that I want to leave folks with is, you know, the work continues. And to use the pot banging analogy again, we have a promise from our legislators that work will get done at the beginning of the next session. And we plan to be very present and reminding them of that and making sure that that work continues to get done. So please come and bang some pots with us. You can go to our website and sign up for our action alerts. And that's how you'll keep abreast of what we are up to. And just want to thank you for having this conversation this evening.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And yeah, I want to encourage people to follow up because it would be great to get those action alerts so then we know what's going on and we can be part of the ongoing work. Let's get our pots and get our spoons and get ready. Thank you all so much, not just for participating tonight. I do so much appreciate you giving up an hour of your time. I know that's precious, especially at night, but also for the ongoing work that you're doing. It's so encouraging to me, and I'm sure to our community, to know that there are such intelligent, faithful, passionate, expert, creative, innovative people who are banging the pots, and that we can come alongside and be led and guided by people who've been in this work for so long. So thank you for the work that you do. And I'm going to call that a night, and hopefully we'll see everybody in our upcoming conversations in the fall. Thank you all.